Hey everybody, it's Mr. Haswin, and I'm back with another thing you should know by being alive, another obscure event leading up to the Revolutionary War. It kind of goes along with our Golden Hill incident, but I want to touch on the Pine Tree Riot. And if you're from New England, I'm sure you're very aware of this, but Midwesterners like myself, this would be a little obscure piece of history for some folks. I know this isn't widely taught in high school classrooms concerning the American Revolution, but I want to touch on it here. So I want to talk about what happened, its background, why it mattered, and its role as a pre-revolution act of resistance. And so let's set the scene here. So in the 1760s and 1770s, we have increased tensions between colonists and British authorities, and it's all due to taxes and trade restrictions, land control. And one issue you may not hear a great deal about would be trees, specifically white pine trees in New Hampshire. And, why pine trees, right? Tall, straight white pines were highly valued by the British Navy for ship masts. And under British law, any white pine that had over 12 inches, a trunk over 12 inches in diameter was marked with a broad arrow on the trunk, and therefore it was claimed for the British Crown. Colonists were forbidden then to cut down these trees, even if these trees were on private land, unless they had paid for a special license to cut down these trees. Well, this law, of course, frustrated colonists who needed these trees. They were very valuable, building homes and businesses for local use. Well, as is kind of the New England spirit, a lot of colonies they ignored the law and they started cutting and using the pines. And in 1772, New Hampshire's Surveyor General John Wentworth began cracking down on illegal logging. And as a result, he started imposing fines. Well, in April of 1772, Deputy Sheriff Benjamin Whiting and his assistant traveled to Weir, New Hampshire to enforce the pine laws and to collect the fines. Well, on April 14th, local mill owners and residents in Weir, they'd had enough. And that night, they surrounded the inn where Whiting and his deputy were staying. They dragged them out of bed. They stripped them, they beat them with switches, and they cut off their horses' manes and tails. I don't know if that was really fair to the horses. Then they chased the two men out of town. And chasing them out of town, they shouted, "You shan't ride over us again." And this became known as the Pine Tree Riot. So, the aftermath. The British authorities charged several men, with crimes, but the local juries in the area sided with the rioters. And there were light fines that were passed out as punishment, and the event became a symbol of colonial resistance. So the Pine Tree Riot encouraged others across the colonies to resist British economic controls. So why does it matter? Well, the Pine Tree Riot was one of the first acts of physical resistance against British authority. It happened 3 years before the Boston Tea Party. It showed that colonists would not accept what they considered to be unfair laws, even those about trees. And if you've ever had a question of, Revolutionary era flags, the pine tree becomes an important revolutionary symbol. You may be familiar with the Appeal to Heaven flag with a pine tree as centered in a white background. And so pine trees begin appearing on flags, like the Massachusetts Navy flag and, like I said, the Appeal to Heaven pine tree flag. So, during the American Revolution, the pine tree became a symbol of liberty and defiance against British control. And what started as a fight over trees became part of the larger story of American resistance and independence. You probably want me to wrap this up by now if you've made it this far. So, the Pine Tree Riot wasn't just about trees. It was about standing up to unfair control, and it was a spark that helped ignite the American Revolution. So if you learned something new tonight, like, comment, follow, share for more things that you should know by being alive, because stories like the Pine Tree Riot show how everyday people took action for liberty. Hey, thanks for watching.